The morning sun rose slowly over the red earth, washing the small village in a soft golden hue. Smoke rose from kitchen fires, children's laughter echoed between the huts, and the scent of roasting maize drifted in the air. In the courtyard of Kalechi's family home, a young woman moved quietly. Her name was Ebony, and this was the beginning of her new life as a wife. Her wrapper was plain but clean, her hair neatly braided, her movements gentle and careful. She bent beside the clay pot to fetch water for her mother-in-law's bath, humming softly, her voice barely louder than the rustling of leaves. Around her, chickens pecked the ground, and an old dog lay half asleep near the doorway. From the inner room came the sharp voice of Mama Ife, Kalechi's mother, strong, respected, but feared for her tongue. "Girl, are you deaf? I said the water must be warm, not boiling like fire." Ebony froze. She had been careful, but she hurried now, kneeling quickly. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said softly. "I will fetch another." Mama Ife emerged, tall and proud despite her age, her wrapper tied tightly, her eyes full of judgment. "You call yourself a wife," she muttered, shaking her head. "A woman who cannot even prepare water properly, how will she handle a home?" Ebony kept her gaze low, her hands steady though her heart trembled. Kalechi sat nearby, polishing his hoe, pretending not to hear. His silence stung more than the words. When Ebony approached him with food later, he avoided her eyes. "Mama just wants what's best," he said quietly. "Don't take her words to heart." Ebony nodded but said nothing. Her silence had become her armor, her refuge. Yet that night, when the house grew quiet, she stepped outside beneath the stars and sat by the old neem tree. The night air was cool and she whispered to the sky, "Silence is not weakness. One day they will know." The next morning came with laughter from the neighbor's compound. Another wife teasing her husband, children splashing at the well. Ebony walked past them, her pot balanced gracefully on her head. The women watched her, whispering. She heard them say she was too quiet, too meek, that she lacked spirit. But Ebony smiled faintly. She had learned long ago from her mother, before death took her, that not every battle was fought with words. Some were fought in silence, waiting for the world to turn in your favor. Days turned to weeks, and her quietness became both shield and target. Mama Ife complained about everything. The taste of soup, the way clothes were washed, even the way Ebony greeted visitors. "You greet like a stranger," she scolded one afternoon as the women of the village sat under the big tree. "A wife should speak proudly, not like she's chewing her tongue." The women laughed, nodding in agreement. Ebony felt heat rise to her face but kept her eyes on the ground. She could feel their eyes, their laughter cutting into her dignity. Still, she bowed her head and murmured, "Yes, Mama." Later that evening, when Kalechi came home, Ebony served his food carefully, making sure the soup was thick and well seasoned. He ate in silence. Mama Ife watched from the corner, her lips curled. "You see," she said. "Even now she cannot look her husband in the eye. What kind of woman hides her face from her man?" Kalechi sighed. "Mama, please?" But she raised a hand. "No. You are my son, and I will not watch you be ruined by a woman who brings only silence and shame." Ebony stood still, her hands trembling slightly as she cleared the dishes. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but something inside told her not to. Words would only feed the fire. When night came, she lay beside her husband and stared at the cracked ceiling. Outside, crickets sang, and the distant sound of a drum echoed from another compound, the rhythm of celebration. She turned her face away, tears slipping silently into her pillow. Her husband shifted beside her, uneasy but speechless. Between them lay a growing distance, built from his mother's bitterness and his own weakness. As dawn approached, Ebony rose before anyone else. She lit the fire, fetched water, swept the yard, and sat quietly beside the door, watching the sky change color. The world felt heavy, but she carried it alone. When Mama Ife stepped out later, she found everything done. The compound was spotless, the breakfast warm, the air scented with fresh herbs. Still, the old woman only grunted. "A clean yard does not make a good wife," she said coldly. "Let's see how long this patience lasts." Ebony didn't answer. She simply smiled faintly and bowed her head again. That evening, when the last light faded and fireflies began to dance above the grass, she walked once more to the neem tree. She sat there quietly, watching the village lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere inside her chest, beneath the pain and humiliation, something was beginning to grow, not anger, not pride, but a quiet strength. The wind carried her whisper again, softer this time, yet certain. One day they will know. The days folded into one another like pages in a weary book. The village sun rose and fell, seasons changed, but inside Mama Ife's compound, Abony's life moved in circles of quiet pain. Each morning she carried calabashes to the stream, her bare feet leaving small prints on the dusty path. Children ran past, splashing in puddles, their laughter bright and careless. She envied that sound, the freedom of those who didn't yet understand cruelty disguised as love. When she returned home, Mama Ife was already awake, her sharp voice slicing through the morning air. "Why so late? Did the river dry up?" "I met others at the stream," Abony replied softly. "Excuses. Always excuses. One day even water will reject your hands." Kelechi sat nearby repairing his fishing net. He glanced at Abony but looked away before she could meet his eyes. It had become a silent dance, her pain, his shame, and the wall his mother built between them. Later that afternoon, Mama Ife's daughter Ngozi arrived, a younger woman, confident, her laughter loud and mocking. She strutted into the courtyard with gold earrings and a colorful wrapper, kissing her mother on both cheeks. "Mama, you look well. Is this the famous wife who hides her tongue?" Abony greeted her politely. Ngozi's smile was sweet but sharp. "Ah, so quiet. Does she even know how to laugh?" Mama Ife laughed with her, pleased. "My dear, this one doesn't speak unless the walls beg her. A wife of air." Abony's hands tightened around the calabash she was washing. She wanted to cry but she refused to let them see. That night as she cooked, she heard them laughing again inside the room. Every laugh was a thorn pressed into her back. When she entered to serve food, Ngozi eyed her from head to toe. "At least she can cook," she said. "Maybe silence is her only good skill." Mama Ife chuckled. "Even the pot can cook when the fire is kind." They laughed together. Kelechi ate quietly, eyes down. Abony stood by the doorway waiting to clear the plates. She watched her husband, his silence heavier than any insult. When they were done, she took the dishes to the back, her heart burning. She wanted to scream into the night, to ask the heavens why dignity was such a heavy gift to carry. Instead, she poured water over the dishes, washing them slowly, her tears falling into the basin. By the next morning, gossip had begun to crawl through the village like smoke. The women at the well whispered that Mama Ife's new bride was lazy, that she brought no dowry, that she wasn't fit for a farmer's home. One woman laughed, "She must have hidden something bad, that's why she never talks." Abony heard every word, but she didn't defend herself. When she reached home, she sat outside the hut, her hands clasped tightly. The day stretched long and heavy. Evenings brought no peace. Mama Ife always found fault. If the soup was too thick, she said Abony wasted ingredients. If too thin, she said the girl had no skill. When guests came, Mama Ife spoke of her proudly, but always with poison beneath. "Yes, that's my son's wife. A quiet one. But quietness doesn't make yams soft, eh?" The women laughed and Abony smiled politely, her heart shrinking each time. One evening she found herself alone by the riverbank, sitting on a flat stone. The moon shone gently on the rippling water, and the night insects hummed their endless song. She sang softly, a melody her mother once sang when storms came. Her voice trembled but did not break. As she sang, she remembered her mother's words, "Patience is not silence. It is waiting for your turn to speak through your actions." The next morning she rose before dawn. She cleaned, cooked, fetched water, and still Mama Ife found fault. But now Abony no longer flinched. Her silence began to change, not fear but control. She answered cruelty with composure that unsettled even her tormentor. By midday, Ngozi had returned to her husband's home. The compound grew quieter, but the air remained thick with judgment. That evening, as Abony served dinner, Mama Ife looked at her for a long time and said, "You think I don't see? You want people to pity you. You want to make me look cruel." Abony froze. "No, Mama. You think your quietness fools me? Let me tell you, this house will not bow to a stranger's tears." Kelechi rose abruptly. "Enough, Mama." She glared at him. "Oh, now you speak? You defend her." He hesitated, his courage crumbling. "I just want peace." "Then teach your wife her place." Abony bowed her head. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the empty bowls. The fire flickered, painting shadows on the walls. The smell of smoke and palm oil hung in the air. She went outside and sat beside the small fire pit. The night was still. From somewhere far away she heard drums, someone's wedding, someone's joy. She closed her eyes. In the silence she whispered to herself again, "One day they will know." The morning began like any other, roosters crowing, smoke curling lazily from hearths, the faint chatter of women preparing for the feast that would fill the village square by noon. The chief's son was marrying, and every household had been asked to contribute food. It was a day of laughter, bright rappers, and drums that promised joy. But in Mama Ife's compound, a different kind of noise brewed. Abeni rose before the sun and began pounding yam. Her arms ached, sweat glistened on her forehead, but she kept her rhythm steady. She wanted to do well today, to leave no fault for her mother-in-law to find. She washed the pots twice, seasoned the soup with care, and laid out calabashes neatly by the fire. Kelechi came to the kitchen area, watching her in silence. "You've been working since before dawn," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Today is a day of joy. The food must be worthy of it." Before he could respond, Mama Ife appeared, her wrapper tied high above her waist, her face set in stone. "You're wasting my ingredients again," she said sharply. "Do you think palm oil grows on trees?" Abeni bowed her head. "I measured carefully, Mama." Mama Ife scoffed. "Carefully? Look at this soup, too thick. You want to feed an army?" Kelechi tried to speak. "Mama, it looks fine." "Keep quiet," she snapped. "You think you know cooking better than me? I have been stirring pots before you were born." Her voice carried through the compound, and soon neighbors glanced over the fence. A few women laughed under their breath. Abeni's cheeks burned, but she kept stirring. By noon, guests began arriving. Relatives, neighbors, friends, everyone dressed in bright colors, carrying laughter on their tongues. Mama Ife had been asked to help serve food for the feast, and her courtyard was full of bowls and steaming pots. As the visitors entered, they greeted her with cheer. "Mama Ife, may your hands never tire." She smiled proudly, but when they turned to Abeni, her smile curdled. "Ah yes," she said loudly, "this is the one who tries to cook but burns water." The guests laughed. Abeni's heart stopped for a moment. She forced a polite smile, murmuring, "Welcome." But the laughter grew. One of the older women shook her head. "You must train her well, Mama Ife. Young wives these days forget their place." Mama Ife's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "She will learn. Even a goat learns not to step into fire after one burn." The laughter echoed again. Abeni felt her hands shaking as she carried a tray of food. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back. She reached the center of the courtyard just as Mama Ife turned toward her and shouted, "And look! She even burnt the meat. Shame will kill me before old age does." The guests gasped. All eyes turned to Abeni. The pot she held slipped from her trembling hands, crashing to the ground, soup spilling across the red earth. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, only the crackle of the fire and the faint chirp of birds broke it. Then Mama Ife stepped forward, her voice rising like thunder. "Useless girl! You shame me before my people." Abeni tried to kneel to explain, but before she could speak, Mama Ife struck her, a hard, open-handed slap that sent her head reeling. Gasps filled the air. A few women turned away, uncomfortable, but none spoke. "You are a curse to this house," Mama Ife shouted. "A woman who brings no joy deserves no respect." Kelechi froze. His face went pale. His wife knelt before his mother, tears now spilling freely. He wanted to move, to stop it, but his legs betrayed him. Fear held him still. The courtyard seemed to spin. Abeni felt the world collapse into sound, the laughter of the women, the murmurs of pity, the humiliation pressing down like a weight. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and rose slowly. Without a word, she turned, walked through the gate, and disappeared down the dusty path. No one stopped her. That night, when the feast ended and the drums quieted, Kelechi searched the compound. Her small bag was gone. Her wrapper, the blue one she wore when she first arrived, was missing from the washing line. He called her name into the darkness, but only the wind answered. Far from the noise, by the quiet riverbank, Abeni sat under the moonlight. Her face was swollen, her heart numb. She watched the silver light ripple across the water and listened to the crickets singing as though nothing had changed. She whispered to herself, voice hoarse and breaking, "Even when they crush me, I will not hate them. I will rise quietly like morning." She lay on the ground, the cold earth beneath her, tears soaking into the dust. Around her, the night grew colder, but her spirit did not break. Somewhere deep within her, something hardened, a calm fire waiting for its time. Back in the village, Mama Ife sat by the dying fire, muttering to herself, "Ungrateful girl. She'll come crawling back when hunger teaches her manners." But hunger would never be the lesson Abeni learned. Her silence that night was not surrender, it was transformation, the quiet beginning of the story that would make a whole village bow to her name. The night she fled her husband's compound, The sky was heavy with clouds, but no rain fell. The wind carried the smell of dust and distant fires, and each gust made her shiver in her torn wrapper. She had nowhere to go, no coin in her pocket, no friend who would dare take her in. Still she walked, her bare feet sinking into the soft earth, guided only by the faint light of the moon. By dawn she reached the river, the same one that wound its way toward the next village. Her body ached, her eyes swollen from crying. She knelt by the bank and washed her face, watching the ripples distort her reflection. Her cheek still bore the faint red mark of her mother-in-law's hand. She touched it gently, whispering, "Let this be the last time I am struck for love." When the sun rose, she lay down beneath a tree too weak to move. The hum of the river and the whisper of leaves became a lullaby that carried her into sleep. It was nearly midday when a shadow fell across her face. A voice, old but kind, said, "Child, are you dead or just tired of living?" Ebony stirred. Standing above her was a woman in her 50s, strong-bodied, with a face marked by both laughter and sorrow. Her wrapper was faded, her hands rough from labor, but her eyes held the warmth of someone who had known pain and survived it. "My name is Mama Iridi," the woman said. "I came for water and found a lost bird. What brings you here?" Ebony tried to speak, but her voice broke. Mama Iridi knelt beside her, touching her forehead. "You've not eaten," she said. "Come. My hut is not big, but my fire is warm." Ebony followed her slowly to a small thatched house near the market road. Inside, the smell of roasted yam filled the air. Mama Iridi gave her food and water, and as Ebony ate, tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "You don't need to talk yet," the old woman said gently. "When the heart is bruised, words only reopen the wound." For the first time in many days, Ebony felt safe. That night, she slept on a mat near the hearth, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the rhythmic sound of Mama Iridi's breathing. The silence was kind, not the silence of shame but of rest. The next morning Mama Iridi handed her a basket of vegetables. "Come with me," she said. "If your hands can work, your spirit will heal." Together they walked to the market. The place was alive with sound, hawkers shouting prices, goats bleating, the smell of palm oil and roasted fish thick in the air. Mama Iridi laid out her goods: peppers, tomatoes, cassava and smoked fish. She gave Ebony a stool beside her. "Sit," she said. "Smile if you can't speak. People trust faces that smile." At first, Ebony was nervous, but as the hours passed, she began to learn. She watched how Mama Iridi spoke to people, honest but firm, respectful yet strong. When she gave change, she always said, "May your hands never tire." The buyers loved her for it. By midday, Ebony found herself selling too. Her voice was soft, but people noticed her calm presence. "Who is that new girl with Mama Iridi?" a woman asked. "Her face looks gentle like river water." Days turned into weeks. Ebony began to earn a little, not much but enough to buy soap and food. Each evening she and Mama Iridi sat by the fire talking. One night the older woman said, "I have seen women rise and fall, Ebony. But you carry your pain like a seed. One day it will bloom." Ebony smiled faintly. "What if it never blooms?" Mama Iridi chuckled. "It will. Even ashes feed the earth." Slowly life began to change. Ebony's kindness drew people. She helped a blind man cross the road, shared her food with hungry children, and tended to a sick widow when others turned away. People began calling her Ebony the Quiet Hand. Her silence was no longer seen as weakness, it became part of her strength. One afternoon a woman came to the market crying. Her child was ill and she had no money for herbs. Ebony took her hand, placed a few coins into it and said softly, "No one should watch their child suffer." The woman wept and kissed her feet. Word spread quickly. Soon even strangers came to her for help, not because she was rich but because she listened. As the months passed, Ebony's small trade grew. She learned how to dry vegetables, how to save profit, and how to barter wisely. The market women began to respect her. Even the chief servant once bought from her and told his mistress about the quiet girl with eyes like rain. At night, when the day's dust settled and the crickets began their song, Ebony often sat outside, looking up at the stars. Her thoughts drifted sometimes to Kalechi, not with anger but with a dull ache that had softened over time. "Perhaps he still listens to his mother," she murmured once. "Perhaps he doesn't even notice I am gone." Mama Iridi overheard her and said, "If a man cannot see your worth when you kneel beside him, let him watch it from afar when you stand tall." Ebony nodded slowly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Under the moonlight, the river shimmered in the distance. The same river that had witnessed her tears now reflected her calm. Her silence remained, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the silence of fear, it was the silence of power waiting for its moment to speak. Seasons passed, and with them the rhythm of Ebony's new life deepened. The harmattan came, dry and dusty, whitening the paths and cracking the lips of those who spoke too much. Yet in the marketplace, Ebony's laughter, soft and restrained, warmed the air like a hidden fire. Her stall had grown into 3. Baskets of bright peppers, golden yams, and fragrant herbs lined her mat. People came not just to buy but to greet her. Ebony the quiet hand, they called her, whose silence feeds the hungry and whose eyes calm the storm. But far away in the compound she once called home, storm clouds had begun to gather. Kelechi sat by the fire one evening, his face shadowed with frustration. His new wife Omotola stirred the pot lazily, her bangles clinking as she moved. The meal smelled burnt and his stomach turned. "Omotola," he said, his tone sharp, "can you not cook without wasting half the food?" She turned to him with a glare. "Then cook it yourself, husband. I am not your mother's servant." At those words, Mama Nkem, his mother, who sat weaving a mat in the corner, raised her head. "This is what I warned you about," she hissed. "A woman with a loose tongue and no respect for elders." Omotola dropped the spoon with a clatter. "You think I am Ebony, eh? That timid rat you used to command? I will not bow to you." The air grew thick. Kelechi clenched his jaw, remembering Ebony's quiet obedience, the way she always lowered her gaze, the softness in her speech. But he quickly pushed the memory aside. "Enough," he snapped. "Both of you silence." Yet silence no longer lived in that house. It had been banished the day Ebony walked out. What remained was noise, bitter words, broken peace, and the heavy weight of regret. Within months, Kelechi's farm began to fail. The yam tubers shrank in the ground, eaten by pests. His goats fell sick. His mother insisted it was witchcraft. "It began after that girl left," she said darkly. "She cursed us with her tears." Kelechi's heart grew restless. At night, he dreamed of the river, the same one near where Ebony had once washed her face. In the dream, the water shimmered and a woman's figure appeared within it. He could never see her face clearly, but her silence echoed louder than any word. Back in the neighboring village, Ebony's kindness had begun to ripple beyond the market. One morning, the chief's daughter fell ill with a fever that no herbalist could cure. The palace sent for every healer, but none could help. It was an old woman in the market who whispered, "Go to Ebony. Her hands may be quiet, but they carry peace." When the guards came to fetch her, Ebony bowed humbly. "I am no healer," she said softly. "Still," the guard replied, "the chief requests your presence. He says even your silence may comfort his child." Ebony followed. The chief's compound was large, its walls painted with faded red clay. Inside, the young girl lay sweating, her breath shallow. Ebony sat beside her, dipped a cloth in cool water, and wiped her forehead gently. She hummed, a tune her mother once sang to her, soft as wind over water. The girl's eyes fluttered open, then closed again in peace. By dawn, the fever had broken. The chief himself came to Ebony, astonished. "What medicine did you give her?" "Only rest," Ebony said. "And love." The chief smiled, a deep, knowing smile. "Then you have given her what gold cannot buy." He sent her away with gifts, cloth, oil, and enough coins to fill a calabash. But Ebony refused most of it. "Let it be known," she said quietly, "that kindness is not for sale." Word spread fast. From that day people began to call her Ebony the Blessed. Meanwhile, Kelechi's household grew darker. Omotola had started whispering to other men, and rumors spread like fire through dry grass. Villagers began to avoid Kelechi. His name, once respected, now drew pitying glances. One night he sat alone outside his hut, staring into the fire. The wind carried faint laughter from the next compound, Omotola's laughter mingled with another man's voice. His hands trembled. For the first time he thought of Ebony not as a memory but as a loss. "Perhaps," he muttered bitterly, "the gods saw my pride and turned their faces." His mother, who had grown weaker, sat beside him, her eyes hollow. "That girl you cast out," she whispered. "She was a blessing we mistook for shame." Kelechi looked at her, unable to speak. The truth, sharp as a blade, cut into him. In the following days he learned that people no longer came to his farm to trade. They went instead to Ebony's market. Even travelers from other villages stopped by her stall to hear her speak, though she said little. Children carried baskets for her, old women blessed her as she passed. Kelechi tried to ignore it, but each whisper of her name burned him like fire. Abani the quiet hand. Abani the blessed. One market day, unable to bear it, he traveled to that village in disguise. He wore an old wrapper, tied his head with a cloth, and moved among the crowd. Then he saw her, standing tall beside Mama Iridi, her wrapper clean, her eyes glowing with calm strength. She was laughing with a customer, her face radiant. Kelechi froze. For a moment, it felt as though the whole market had turned golden around her. She looks like light itself, someone murmured beside him. Do you know, the chief calls her daughter of the gods? Kelechi's heart sank. He wanted to speak to her, to kneel and beg forgiveness, but shame held his tongue. The weight of his choices pressed down until he could barely breathe. As he turned to leave, Mama Iridi's gaze caught him, sharp, knowing. She said nothing, only raised an eyebrow. Kelechi lowered his head and walked away, his footsteps heavy with the dust of regret. The days that followed were golden for Abani. Her quiet strength had become a song carried by the wind, from market to market, from riverbank to distant hills. Mothers told their daughters, be like Abani, whose silence built her crown. The chief's wife herself began to visit her, asking for herbs and guidance. And though Abani always bowed humbly, she could feel the weight of respect settle gently upon her shoulders, like sunlight that did not burn. Yet for all her grace, she remained unchanged in spirit, simple, generous, and calm. Each morning before the market opened, she would walk to the river to pray. Not to ask for riches nor revenge, but to give thanks. She would kneel, cupping the cool water in her palms, whispering, "May my heart never harden, no matter what the world brings." Mama Iridi often watched her from a distance. "Child," she said one morning, "you carry peace like a pot that never spills." Abani smiled faintly. "Maybe it is because once it was broken and now I know how to hold it carefully." The old woman laughed softly, her wrinkles deepening with pride. That same week, the chief organized a great festival of harvest, a celebration of plenty after years of drought. The entire region was invited. Dancers rehearsed, drums echoed across the hills, and traders prepared their best goods for display. Mama Iridi told Abani, "We will sell there. The chief's guests will pay in gold." Abani agreed, spending days drying vegetables, cleaning gourds, and arranging spices into baskets. When the morning came, they loaded everything onto a cart and joined the caravan of traders traveling toward the festival ground. The air was alive with color and laughter. Drummers played along the road, palm fronds waved, and children danced ahead of their parents. For the first time in years, Abani felt joy not weighed down by sorrow. But destiny, silent and patient, was walking the same road, in the opposite direction. Kelechi had also come to the festival, though not in celebration. His fortunes had fallen so deeply that he now sold small carvings by the roadside to survive. His farm was gone, Omadala had left him for another man, and his mother lay sick at home, too weak to speak. Pride had drained from him like blood from an open wound. When he heard of the festival, he thought perhaps he could sell his carvings there, maybe earn enough to buy medicine for Mom and Kem. He did not know that Abani would be there too. The festival ground was wide and bright. Cloths of every color fluttered in the breeze, and the scent of roasted yam, palm wine, and wood smoke filled the air. People from 7 villages had gathered, their voices mingling like waves. Abani's stall stood near the center. She had arranged her goods beautifully, woven mats covered with peppers red as fire, gourds shining like polished gold, and baskets of cassava dusted with sunlight. Customers came in waves, praising her honesty and beauty. "Abani the Blessed," they called. "Daughter of the river." Kelechi wandered the same ground, his eyes dull with exhaustion. When he heard that name, Abani, his heart stopped. He turned, scanning the crowd, and saw her. For a moment, time folded upon itself. There she stood, calm, graceful, radiant. The same woman he had once sent away in shame, now surrounded by people who treated her like royalty. His throat tightened. The world blurred. He stepped closer, his hands trembling, his voice barely a whisper. "Abani." She looked up, startled. Her eyes met his, and in that instant the noise of the festival seemed to fade away. There was no hatred in her gaze, no anger, only a quiet distance, as if she were seeing someone from a dream long past. Kelechi fell to his knees. "Abani, forgive me," he said, his voice cracking. "I have been blind. Everything I had turned to dust the day you left." People turned to look. A hush fell over that part of the market. Abani's lips parted slightly. She wanted to speak, but words seemed too heavy. Instead, she knelt and lifted his head gently. "Kelechi," she said softly, "the past is not a fire to feed, let it rest in ashes." He broke down, sobbing openly. "You owe me nothing," she continued. "But I owe myself peace." Then she rose, dusted her hands and turned away to serve another customer. The crowd was silent, awed. No one expected mercy from the woman who had once been disgraced. Yet in her calm dismissal, there was a power greater than revenge. By the time Kalechi stood again, she was gone, already walking toward the chief's tent to deliver her goods. The crowd murmured. "She forgave him," one said in wonder. "And that is why the gods bless her." That night, Abani returned home, her heart heavy but free. She sat outside with Mama Iridi under the starlight. "He came," she said quietly. The old woman nodded. "And what did you give him?" "Nothing," Abani said. "And everything. I gave him silence." Mama Iridi smiled. "Sometimes silence is the loudest answer." They sat together in peace. Crickets sang, the air smelled of rain, and the stars blinked gently like the eyes of old spirits watching. Far away, Kalechi walked the road home, his feet bleeding, his pride shattered. He would never be the same man again, and somewhere deep inside, he knew that losing Abani had been the gods' way of humbling him. But the tale of what happened that day spread across the region. Mothers told their daughters, Abani bowed to no bitterness. The one who was shamed became the one all bowed to. And from that moment, the village no longer remembered her as the girl who had been humiliated. She became Abani of the river, Abani the blessed, Abani whose name the village bows to. The rains came early that year. Heavy, endless rains that soaked the earth until the paths turned to rivers and the sky wept day after day. The villagers said the gods were cleansing the land, washing away sins, pride, and old wounds. Abani worked through it all. The market became a place of shelter where laughter mixed with the smell of wet clay and roasted corn. Children huddled near her stall to keep dry, and she would share slices of yam with them, smiling as their small hands reached eagerly. One evening, after the clouds had finally broken, a messenger came running from the chief's compound, breathless and dripping with rain. "Abani," he called. "You are needed at once. The river has overflowed. It has taken half the fields and 2 huts. The chief asks for your counsel." Mama Iridi frowned. Her counsel? What can they expect her to do with water? But Abani was already rising. She tied her wrapper firmly, took a calabash of oil and said, "When the river speaks, someone must listen." The flood had turned the lower end of the village into chaos. People were crying, children trapped on rooftops, livestock drifting away with the current. The chief and his men stood helpless on higher ground, shouting orders that no one obeyed. When Abani arrived, heads turned. Even in panic, people noticed her calm. Her presence cut through the noise like light through smoke. She walked straight to the edge of the flood, removed her slippers and stepped into the muddy water. "The river is not angry," she said softly, "it is only full." The men stared, unsure what she meant. She turned to the chief. "The far bank still has dry ground," she said. "We can make a path through the grove, the trees will hold the soil. Send the young men with ropes. Women should form a chain to pull the children across." Her voice carried authority, not command, the kind that comes when people want to obey. The chief nodded at once. "Do as she says." Within moments, the village came alive with movement. Ropes were tied, lines formed, and under Abani's direction, they began to rescue those stranded. She moved between them tirelessly, helping a child onto dry ground, steadying a mother who had lost her strength, blessing the men who carried the old across their backs. Hours passed before the water began to recede. When it did, the people were drenched, exhausted, but alive. Not one soul had been lost. The chief stood before Abani, bowing low. "You have saved us," he said. "You, who once were scorned, have given our village back its breath." The people echoed his words, chanting softly at first, then louder, "Abani, Abani, Abani." Their voices rose into the dark sky, carrying gratitude into the wind. Abani's eyes glistened with tears, but she shook her head. "It was not me," she said. "It was the river that gave back what it took." But from that day the story changed. They said the river listened only to her. That when Abani spoke, even water obeyed. And the name Abani of the river began to be spoken with reverence, not as a tale of pain, but of power born from grace. Weeks later, when the land had dried, the chief invited her to the palace. "You have led our people when even I could not," he said. "From today, you will sit in the council of elders as our voice of peace." Abani was stunned. "But I am not of noble blood," she said. "I am a woman who once carried shame." The chief smiled. "And that is why your wisdom is greater than ours. Those who have tasted sorrow speak truth with gentler tongues." And so it was that Abony, once cast out, once humiliated, now sat in the circle of leaders beside the chief and the elders. Her words, few but steady, guided judgments, settled disputes and softened hearts. When men quarreled over land, she reminded them, the earth does not fight back, yet we walk on it daily. When women argued, she said, silence can heal faster than shouting. Even the children of the village learned her sayings by heart, reciting them like songs. But not everyone could bear the change. From his lonely hut on the hill, Kalechi watched it all unfold. His mother had passed quietly one morning, whispering Abony's name as her last word. And now, as he walked through the same village where once his pride had reigned, people looked away in pity. He no longer had anger in his heart, only emptiness. One day he made his way to the riverbank where he knew she often prayed. When he saw her there, kneeling in her usual calm, he did not approach. He only watched from afar as the breeze lifted her wrapper and the water shimmered around her. He whispered into the wind, "You are everything I never deserved." Then he turned and walked away, leaving footprints that the river quickly washed away. The next morning a group of elders arrived at Abony's hut, bearing gifts. "The people wish to honor you," they said. "You will lead the first harvest ceremony, not as a servant, not as a trader, but as a woman whose name brings blessings." Mama Iridi beamed with pride, her eyes misty. "The same village that once turned its back now kneels before you, my child." Abony looked toward the horizon. The sun was rising, golden and calm, just like the light that lived now inside her. "I did not need them to bow," she said softly. "I only needed to stand." Mama Iridi smiled. "And yet look, they bow anyway." The drums of the coming ceremony began to echo faintly from the distance. The sound was deep, ancient, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Abony closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. The world that once shamed her now whispered her name in reverence. The day of the great harvest dawned with a stillness that felt sacred. The air was cool, the sky pale blue, and the scent of wet soil hung heavy, as if the earth itself had bathed in anticipation. Birds sang softly in the trees, and from every path came the sounds of laughter, footsteps, and the steady beat of drums that called the people together. The festival ground had never looked so alive. Colorful fabrics fluttered like wings, the scent of roasted maize and palm wine filled the air, and garlands of fresh leaves framed the stage where the chief and elders would sit. In the center stood a tall, carved stool draped in white cloth, the seat of honor reserved for the one chosen to bless the harvest. Abony had no idea it was meant for her. She arrived quietly, dressed in a simple white wrapper that shimmered faintly in the sun. Her hair was braided neatly, her face bare except for a small line of white chalk drawn down her forehead, a mark of peace. Mama Iridi walked beside her, proud as ever, her eyes shining like a mother's on her daughter's wedding day. When they reached the ground, people began to whisper and bow. "Abony," someone murmured. "She has come." The chief rose from his seat, lifting his staff. "People of our land," he called, his voice carrying over the crowd. "The gods have given us rain and food, but they have also given us something greater, a woman whose heart has fed our spirit. Today she will bless this harvest." Abony froze, her breath catching. "Me?" she whispered. Mama Iridi nodded. "Yes, my child. The one who fed the hungry must now bless the feast." Slowly Abony stepped forward. The crowd parted like a river making way for its queen. Every eye followed her, the same eyes that once turned away when she walked through the village in shame. Children ran ahead, scattering petals at her feet. When she reached the stool, she hesitated. The chief gestured kindly. "Sit, Abony of the river. The land waits for your voice." She sat, trembling slightly. The drummers quieted. The wind fell still. For a moment, all that could be heard was the rustle of leaves and the faint cry of a distant bird. Abony rose again, holding a small calabash filled with palm oil. She lifted it to the sky and spoke, her voice calm but strong enough to carry. "Once this land saw me as a stranger," she began. "I was shamed where I should have been loved, silenced when I should have been heard. But the river carried my tears and the earth kept my footsteps. Today I return not with anger but with peace. May our harvest be full, and may our hearts never forget the taste of humility." She poured the oil onto the ground. It spread slowly, glistening like gold in the sunlight. The crowd erupted into cheers. Drums thundered. The chief bowed deeply to her, not out of formality but reverence. Then one by one the villagers followed. Men, women, children, all bowed to Abony. Even elders bent low, their foreheads touching the dust. Mama Iridi's eyes filled with tears. "You see, child," she whispered, When you rise without pride, the world kneels without force. Ebony's vision blurred with emotion. She had dreamed once of being accepted, but this was more than acceptance. It was redemption turned into song. As the drums picked up again, the celebration began. People danced in circles, laughter ringing through the fields. Ebony joined them, her feet light, her heart free. The chief declared, "From this day forth, her name shall bless our waters and our children. When the river floods, we will call to her spirit. When the harvest begins, we will speak her name first." And so it became tradition. Each year after that, at the beginning of planting season, the people would gather by the riverbank to pour oil into the water, whispering, "For Ebony, whose name the village bows to." But even as her name spread far and wide, Ebony herself remained humble. She continued to live simply, helping in the market, tending to the sick, comforting widows. Her hut never grew larger, but its doorway never closed to anyone in need. One evening, after the festival had ended and the stars were out, a familiar figure appeared outside her hut, Kelechi. He looked older, thinner, a man weathered by time and regret. He knelt silently before her. "I came not to ask forgiveness," he said softly, "but to thank you. For your mercy, for your strength, and for showing me the man I failed to be." Ebony looked at him quietly for a long time. Then she said, "The past has no house here, Kelechi. Go build yourself a new one, not with pride but with truth." He nodded, tears falling freely. "I will never forget your name." She smiled gently. "You don't need to remember my name," she said. "Just remember the lesson." When he left, the wind carried away the sound of his footsteps, and the river seemed to hum faintly as if singing. Ebony stood there for a long time, her face turned toward the moon. That night, the chief's drummer composed a new song, one that would be sung for generations. "She who was shamed became the crown of our peace. She who was cast out became the voice of the river. Ebony, whose silence spoke louder than thunder. Ebony, whose name the village bows to." And when the moon rose high, its light touched the water where Ebony had once washed her tears, turning it silver, as if even the river itself bowed to her name. Years drifted by like the slow turning of seasons. The village changed, new huts rose, children grew, and the fields that once suffered drought now glowed green every planting season. But through all those changes, one thing remained constant: Ebony's quiet presence, her steady wisdom that had become the heartbeat of her people. She was no longer just Ebony the Blessed. The people now called her Mama Ebony of the River, for her counsel flowed as steadily and clearly as water. When disputes arose, when young brides cried, when men quarreled over land, they came to her hut at dusk. And always she would listen, not rushing to judge, not seeking praise. Sometimes her advice came in words, sometimes only in silence, a silence that seemed to make others hear their own hearts more clearly. Her hut had become a sanctuary. Not grand or adorned, just a small space where mats were neatly spread, herbs hung from the rafters, and the soft scent of palm oil and dried leaves filled the air. Mama Iridi, now old and frail, sat most days beside her, their companionship so deep that they no longer needed to speak much. When the sun dipped low, they would sit by the doorway watching children play by the riverbank. "Ebony," Mama Iridi said one evening, her voice thin as the wind, "the gods did not make you rich but they made you full." Ebony smiled faintly. Full hearts feed more than full hands. They shared a soft laugh, the laughter of women who had walked through fire and come out singing. That night, a group of young women arrived, faces shy but eager. They carried baskets of maize as offering. "Mama Ebony," one said kneeling, "teach us how to walk without shame. Teach us how to be strong without anger." Ebony's eyes softened. She took one of their hands. "The world will test your gentleness," she said. "Do not let it break you. Power that grows from kindness lasts longer than the kind that grows from fear." The girls nodded, their eyes glistening. From that day on, they began to visit often, learning not just about herbs or trade, but about patience, forgiveness, and dignity. Ebony's hut became a place of teaching, and soon mothers began sending their daughters there before marriage. "Go learn how to build peace," they would say. But beyond the lessons, Ebony herself continued her daily rituals, visiting the river at dawn, offering a calabash of oil, whispering thanks. Some said the river now glowed faintly where she walked, that fish gathered near her feet and birds circled above. Whether truth or myth, no one doubted that the gods favored her. One dry season, the neighboring village of Itoro fell into conflict. Two clans were fighting over a piece of land that bordered Ebony's people. Spears were drawn, and for weeks the threat of war hung like a storm cloud. The chief of Ebony's village called her to council. "They will not listen to us," he said. But they might listen to you. You have become a bridge between hearts. Go and speak if your spirit agrees. Ebony hesitated. War is not silenced by words alone, she said. Perhaps not, the chief replied, but you are not words alone. And so, though her hair had turned silver and her steps had slowed, Ebony set out with a small group toward Itoro. When they arrived, the sight of her caused murmurs to ripple through the angry crowd. Both sides recognized her face, the woman of peace, the one whose story mothers had told for years. She walked to the center of the field and raised her hand. The shouting died down as if even the air waited. Land does not belong to us, she said quietly. We belong to it. You fight for what will one day hold your bones. Will you stain the soil that must one day feed your children's roots? There was silence. Her words sank deep, finding their way into the hidden corners of men's hearts. Then, slowly, one elder lowered his spear. Another followed. Within minutes, the rage that had built for months began to melt away. That day, peace returned, not by decree but by the echo of one woman's voice. When she came home, the people welcomed her as if returning from battle. Drums played, women sang, and the chief declared, once again her tongue has done what swords could not. That night, Ebony sat by the river once more, her reflection shimmering beside the moonlight. Perhaps, she whispered, this is why the gods spared me that night long ago, not to live but to teach living. A cool wind passed, and in its sound she thought she heard Mama Iridi's faint laughter drifting from the hut. The old woman had passed peacefully earlier that season, leaving her gourd of herbs and her blessing with Ebony. Ebony wept softly but smiled too, for she knew that her teacher had only gone ahead to the same river's far bank. From then on, Ebony's wisdom became part of the land's memory. Children grew up hearing her sayings in their lullabies. The quiet hand heals faster than the angry tongue. A woman's tears can drown a man's pride. If the river takes your pain, do not fetch it back. Her words shaped the hearts of generations, and soon, neighboring villages began to send messengers just to sit by her fire and listen. Even the king of a distant town sent her gifts once, saying, I have counselors with titles, but none with truth like yours. And still, Ebony lived simply, her days wrapped in peace. Though her fame stretched far, she never built a palace, never wore jewels. Her only adornment was the calm glow in her eyes and the gentle smile that had survived everything. In her old age, when the sun sank each evening, she would sit by the same river, whispering softly to the water, Thank you for carrying my tears, old friend. And when the wind stirred the trees in reply, it sounded almost like a blessing, as though the world itself was bowing once more to her name. The years folded softly, one into another, until time itself seemed to move at the rhythm of Ebony's breath. She had become part of the village's heartbeat, her presence so constant that it was easy to forget she was mortal. Her back had curved with age, her hair now white as cotton, her voice a low hum that carried wisdom like the river carried silt. Every morning before the cocks crow, she still walked slowly to the river's edge. She no longer fetched water herself, the young women insisted on doing it for her, but she always came to greet the dawn. Her body had grown frail, but her spirit stood taller than ever. The people said, the sun itself rises to greet Mama Ebony. One morning she found herself too weak to make the walk. She sat by her doorway instead, watching the mist drift over the fields. The world was quiet. Even the goats grazed softly as if the earth knew to lower its voice. Mama Iridi's old stool stood beside her, empty but full of memory. Her eldest son Adio, who had grown into a respected man, came and knelt beside her. Mother, he said softly, the people ask if you will join the council tonight. They are planning the festival for the harvest. Ebony smiled faintly. Tell them the harvest will come whether or not I speak. My tongue has spoken enough for one lifetime. He hesitated. The people love you, mother. They want to honor you this year, to make the festival yours. She turned to him, eyes soft but firm. The honor is not mine, Adio. It belongs to every woman who carried shame and still rose to greet the morning. Tell them to dance for that. He lowered his head, tears shimmering in his eyes. Yes, mother. That evening, the village gathered by the river for the festival. Lanterns glowed, drums echoed, laughter danced in the air. But in Ebony's hut, a quiet peace had settled. She lay on her mat, her breathing shallow but calm. The flicker of a single oil lamp lit her face, revealing a serenity that was almost divine. Outside voices sang, her name woven into the chorus. The song was not of pity but of gratitude. She who bore shame like a crown. She who turned pain into light. Ebony, mother of peace. The village bows to your name. She listened, eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. The melody seemed to carry her gently, as though every note was a hand guiding her home. And then, as the final drumbeat faded into the night, her chest rose once more, and did not fall again. By dawn, word had spread across the village. There was no wailing, no frenzy, only quiet awe. The people moved softly, as if afraid to break the calm she left behind. Women came with flowers and laid them by her doorway. Men removed their caps as they passed. Children whispered her name as though speaking it too loudly might disturb the peace of her sleep. When they carried her body to the river, the sky was bright and clear, the same kind of day she had always loved. The water shimmered as if greeting her return. Her daughters-in-law washed her feet with scented oil, while the elders recited blessings. She lived with dignity even when the world denied it, said one. She turned her enemies into her legacy, said another. And finally the chief himself bowed his head and said, once she was shamed. But today the earth itself kneels to her. They buried her beneath the old palm tree by the water, the place she had often sat in thought. The villagers called it Abony's palm and no one dared cut it down. They said its roots reached both water and heaven, binding peace between the two. Years turned to decades. Children grew, stories shifted. But Abony's name did not fade. Her tale became a lesson every mother told her daughter on the eve of marriage. If they shame you, remember Abony, for she turned pain into power and forgiveness into fire. Travelers who passed through the village often heard her story before the night ended. Merchants told it on dusty roads, adding new flourishes, but always keeping the same truth, that a woman wronged had taught an entire people how to heal. The palm tree grew massive, its branches spreading wide enough to shade the river's bend. Beneath it, young women often sat to pray or think. And sometimes in the soft rustle of leaves, they swore they could hear her voice, calm, measured, full of warmth. The ones who shame you do not define you. Your silence can become thunder. Your tears can water the roots of your own strength. The village itself changed. Roads widened, houses grew stronger, new generations rose, but every child learned early the story of Abony. During festivals, the griots would begin their songs with her name, their drums echoing the rhythm of her endurance. Even the descendants of her mother-in-law, long gone, bowed when her name was spoken. Not out of guilt anymore but respect. Time had washed away bitterness, leaving only truth. Abony had turned the wounds of one woman into the wisdom of an entire people. And so, the tale lived on, passed from lips to lips, from mother to child, from generation to generation. They said when the wind passed through the palm leaves at dusk, it carried her spirit's laughter, light and forgiving. And on nights when the moon reflected perfectly in the river's calm surface, the villagers would whisper softly to one another, "Look, Abony is watching." The woman who was shamed, but before whom even the village bowed.